Welcome to the Dairy Farmers Digest, a podcast dedicated to all things dairy farming. Each episode, we will talk to industry leaders who share their insights and experiences into the dairy business. I'm your host, Keith Schweitzer, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to the DFD podcast. I'm excited to have Dr. Barry Bradford from Michigan State University on this afternoon. He's a professor in the Department of Animal Science, also the host of the Dairy Podcast Show. So if anybody out there hasn't listened to it, you should check it out. So welcome to the DFD podcast, Dr. Bradford.
Thanks. I'm looking forward to this. Appreciate the opportunity.
So you guys at Michigan State have a big weekend this weekend, I see.
We do, yes.
Sweet 16. What is it? They're in the final 8 for the men's D1 hockey.
I think you're right. I'm not much of a hockey follower, but they've had a good year, good winter season here for us.
So you're more excited about the basketball team.
Yeah, I'm more into basketball.
Yeah, well, I didn't know, like with the hockey, I think I was looking at the schedule today. I'm a hockey fan, not so much D1. I don't want to pay attention a lot, but I see they're playing Cornell this tonight actually. So I didn't know if you had like a side bet going on with the faculty over there or not. Or
I should. I'm not plugged in enough. I have a bunch of friends that follow it, and I hear the stories after the games are done.
Yeah. So anyways, it's good to have you on today. I know, I guess we're kind of located here in Western Ontario, so we got a very similar climate to what you guys do in Michigan. So if people aren't familiar, Michigan State's kind of right in the center of the hand, kind of smack dab in the middle of Michigan. So we're about an hour and a half, I guess, west of Sarnia, Ontario. So let's enough about me. Let's talk about you a little bit. Like, how did you get into your role that you're at here at Michigan State?
Well, yeah, if I go way back, I grew up on a beef operation, and that was kind of my focus when I first went to college. But I got involved in a lab that had work going in beef and dairy and even pork projects, and it gave me some good exposure. And I had the chance to run a study early in my time in the lab at the dairy unit at Iowa State, and really was eye-opening for me. Like from a nutrition perspective, the dairy cow's so interesting. Like she eats so much, and her nutrient requirements are so challenging. I just found it fascinating, and then ended up studying that in grad school. And then when I finished my PhD, I'm in a dairy management role now. I wouldn't have been qualified to do anything with dairy management at the time, but 13 years I was at Kansas State and teaching and research, but helping out in extension and interacting with farms, and sort of slowly built my understanding of how farms operate, dairy farms, and had this opportunity 5 years ago to come back to Michigan State in an extension and research role. And I've really enjoyed that in a sort of broader management, interacting with the industry a lot. And it's a lot of fun. And particularly now that we have a new dairy facility going up, and we visited Guelph 3 or 4 times in that process of planning that, to see the facility there and learn from that. So it's going to be really fun opportunities to interact with people in Ontario as well with this kind of effort.
I toured the Michigan State facility maybe 10 years ago or something like that with Joe Dominic.
Oh, yeah.
And we were on kind of a business trip over there. We would go, like every other year or something like that, somewhere in North America to kind of look at dairy herds and the dairy business there. And we ended up at Michigan State, and I never realized like there is a ton of dairy in Michigan.
Yeah. We're not nearly as big as like Wisconsin, but I think we're the number 6 dairy state. And the thing is, a lot of the facilities were built like in the 90s. So the industry here grew by leaps and bounds in the 90s and early 2000s, and then it kind of leveled off. But that's why for I think the last 8 or 9 years, we've had the highest milk per cow of anywhere in the country. Like people that built the facilities and really knew what they're doing, a lot of Dutch immigrants. And now they've kind of hit cruising altitude, and they're really cranking milk. Also, I think our climate and forages here, like Ontario, are for cows, right? That's part of it too.
Well, I mean, if you look at where a lot of the milk in North America comes from, you can pretty much draw a line across the Great Lakes, whether it be Wisconsin, Michigan, New York, Ontario, Pennsylvania, even into Ohio, right? So,
yep, exactly.
Yeah, and I always had heard like even touring the herds back then, like 10 years ago, they were talking about, 100 pounds, 110 pounds, 115 pounds, which is like to kind of convert the math, that's like a 45 kilo or a 50 kilo, 52, 53 kilo herd. Like it's an amazing amount of energy. And I had a colleague that used to call dairy cows the elegant athletes of the agriculture industry. So,
Absolutely. Yeah, and what's amazing now, you go around the state and I mean, the trends are not that different across North America, but those numbers haven't changed too much, 100, 110 pound herds. But the big difference is now they're making 4.2, 4.3 fat, right? And they were,
yeah.
so their yield hasn't really risen, but they're making a lot more, fat corrected milk actually.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing. Like back then, like everybody, when we were there, it was I think July or August, and everybody was talking about 3.4, 3.5 fats. And I know,
Mhm.
like even in our dairy herd as a whole here in Ontario, and I know it's kind of the same through Midwest. Like some of the fat numbers and milk numbers that these cows are putting out now, like there's herds approaching, 3.5 kilos of solids, right? Like, so that
Yep.
would be what, 7, 8 pounds of solids, like in American numbers. And like, that's a tremendous amount of output.
There's people who I think are extreme in this argument, but there's this never ending argument about, do we stress cows by making them very productive, right? And I think there's some middle ground there, but it's still really interesting to go back and read papers from like the 70s or like, wow, can we push cows to 4 pounds of components and, are they gonna still be, have any immunity or reproduce or anything? And it's like, well, clearly they were underestimating what the cow could do at that point.
My opinion is on it. If a cow's producing that much, like on a herd level, the producers have to be doing something right and taking a
Yep.
lot of the roadblocks out of the way for the cows because I don't think we've met the genetic potential of a cow yet of what she can actually do.
Yeah.
Right? So
You
like
look at some of the world record cows, right? Yeah, it's amazing.
we put a lot of roadblocks in there in front of them, and we
Yeah,
do a lot of things to help them as well. But I mean, they're a very interesting creature, and just when you think you get them figured out, they prove you wrong again. So
yeah, yep,
yeah. So a lot of your work, like you're about a 50% extension and 50% research and teaching.
that's right. Yep.
Can you maybe explain like a little bit more of what the extension is? Like we don't see a lot of extension here in Canada. Like I think that's more of a US or European based program.
Yep. Yeah, it's a more formal thing here, right? I definitely know you have faculty there that do a great job of outreach to the industry, but it's maybe not
Hmm.
written in their job like it is here. So
Yeah.
I'm thankful we have that here. And it's kind of like on the research side, it's sort of like, okay, we picked you for this job, go get them and, like be creative, figure out some things to do. So classically, I would say the classic model from 50 years ago of dairy extension was you set up maybe once a month some meeting around the state and you do a 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. program or something like that and serve lunch so people can come between milkings, right? So
Hmm.
not too long ago, we've tried to still do those things and it doesn't work very well. As you know, the scale we have for most of our farms here, almost nobody that owns a farm is milking anyway. So trying to squeeze between morning and night milkings doesn't really make sense. And then, what people are dealing with in the middle of the day is putting out fires. So,
Yeah.
it's trying to think about what world do producers and second and third level managers on bigger dairies, what world do they live in right now and how can we meet their needs? So, we're doing some things like, we're trying to put out content in many, many different formats. And with the technology today, it's not that hard, but, we're doing podcasts. If we write an article, we put it in print publication, we put it online, we talk about it on social media. We even use texting right now to let people know about meetings that are happening in person. So trying to, again, meet people the best way they want to get information. But also, I think the most valuable thing we can do is engage with people directly. 2 days ago, I got up at 3 a.m. and was on a farm by 3:45 to watch their whole feeding process as part of a feeding program assessment, looking for shrink problems, looking for inefficiencies in the way they do things.
Yep.
That particular farm was great, but like I think, delivered some good value to some farms when we've gone in with a fresh set of eyes and thought about better ways to do things. So it's a sort of services that maybe aren't easy to find in the private sector, or we have a niche, or the fact that we're not selling a product with it, maybe helps us bring some value in ways that a company can't. The other thing I'm excited about that's new for my program on extension is if you look at some of the more integrated animal ag sectors, poultry the most extreme, but
Yep.
also swine and even feedlot, one thing we've really seen as they've consolidated is they've specialized so much. So now, like the big poultry integrators all have multiple PhD scientists working for them, doing experiments all the time to figure out the best way to do things. And it's all their private IP, right? It doesn't get published.
Mhm.
I hope we don't get there in the dairy world, but I do think we are at a scale now where farms can do ask their own questions in a more careful way. So we're starting to offer a service of working with farms to identify the question they want to answer and then figure out, can we do this by mining their data? Or should we set up some kind of controlled experiment to the best extent possible on that farm? And then we can offer analytical help to get the best data we can out of that.
Yeah, and that's super interesting because like the amount of data you can mine out of a farm now is incredible. Like
Yeah.
between having something like Dairy Comp or, feeding software and things like that. Like there's like I know in our role, like it's way too difficult some days to really focus in on one thing because we got so many different things going on. And I know I was doing a podcast one time and I just started writing down, we were talking a little bit about like information collecting. And I think I deal with over 20 different programs on farm now, computer programs like between
Wild.
dairy comp, parlor programs, robot programs,
Yeah.
like it's
Feed
just
management software on top of that, right?
yeah, exactly, right. So it's more and more common now here in Ontario than it was maybe 5 years ago of producers to have feed management software. So
Okay. And just real quick, one example of, I think, why there's value in us getting involved in some of these things. So occasionally in the past, I've been pulled in on things where, like, for example, injectable or bolus type interventions, people have it's pretty easy to randomize those, right?
yeah,
You say, okay, odd number tags, they're going to get a bolus, even they're not, and we're going to see how things go. That's great. I mean, you can do it really clean. But it's funny, I remember just a year and a half ago, I was helping a farm with something like that, and they just used dairy comp to try to look at the outcomes, okay, which is fine. And they're like, oh, the bolus really helped. Well, I got the data set, and you start looking at things, and the bolus group had way more heifers in it. Okay. So
but
guess
dairy comp
what? The
doesn't
bolus
see
group had
that.
less disease,
Yeah,
right?
the
And if you
dairy.
don't
Yeah,
do a more careful analysis, you totally miss that. And if they had perfectly set up the experiment, that wouldn't happen. But that never happens. Even on
yeah.
universities, we always have problems that happen in the experimental design phase. So that's just one example of how, like, taking your time to do it right can make the difference between making a wrong conclusion and a right one.
It really excites me a little bit when producers want to do some more of this stuff on farm because we can, like like you guys publish great papers out of Michigan State, but that's all completely controlled. Like what happens when you start throwing in feeding variability or one guy that catches cows makes a lot of noise and another guy doesn't. Like there's a
Yeah,
lot of
absolutely.
variability thrown at the farm that you
Yeah,
just don't see in the academia world. So
I agree with you.
I know like your expertise is in physiology and you've been doing a lot of work on choline. So can you maybe touch a little bit on some of the things that you've had coming down the pipe? And I know one thing that really interested me is that Michigan State had a study about colostrum yield and feeding choline, which was it's the question I've asked myself for the last 10, 15 years. Why do we see less colostrum sometimes than other times, right? So
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So we ran one study, but we had a ton of data. So I think we've published 4 papers on that study now. There's really 2 novel pieces of that. There's been a lot of research with choline. One was we worked with Balchem and we were studying their newer formulation that I think is on the market in Europe. I'm not sure about Canada, but it's not here in the US yet, I don't think. And so then we were testing sort of the current available dose of choline versus a higher dose. But then the other novel thing is we were kind of wondering to what extent the benefits of choline in terms of milk yield were due to relieving inflammatory pressure or oxidative stress.
mhm.
So we thought to assess that, maybe it made sense to further challenge cows and see if the choline treated cows handled it better. So 17 days after calving, we did, in half the cows, we did a intramammary endotoxin challenge to mimic a like E. coli
Yeah.
mastitis. And the cows crashed for a day or so. and sort of recover. And we didn't see any difference in how the choline cows handled it. But regardless of whether they got challenged or not, the choline cows in our study, I think it was the biggest response anybody's reported yet. We got like 3.5 kilos of milk, additional milk out of the choline
Wow.
treatment. So why our cows were so responsive to it, I don't really know. They were very productive, some of the most productive cows in the literature for fresh cows. And then they, bounced that much more. So that was interesting. But yeah, we weren't really focused on colostrum, but we're like, oh, we should measure this, right? We started
Yeah.
feeding 24 days before calving. So we collected that data and we ran the statistics. We're like 80% more colostrum with the choline treated cows, regardless of the dose. Whoa.
I can't remember. Was there a difference in quality?
No, I was gonna say the
No.
components in the IgG were basically equal,
Yeah.
not significantly different anyway. So we're like, and there've been one or two other papers, maybe two other papers. One of them also saw a benefit, the other didn't. So I wouldn't say it always is going to benefit, but I will say this, and I don't want to sound like a salesman at all, but I shared this in some extension stuff we were doing with, sort of directly talking with handfuls of farms, and a few farms saw the colostrum data and they're like, oh, well, they weren't ever very interested in like solving fatty liver. They didn't think they had those problems.
Yeah.
And they started feeding this, and anecdotally, two or three farms came back and said, I had way more colostrum in the fall than I ever have before.
Yeah.
And they attributed it to that, right or wrong. And yeah, to your point, I mean, I think the literature now is pretty well nailed down that during the fall is when most people see a drop in colostrum yield. But it's not super consistent in terms of the exact timing. I think my perception is that's probably a day length thing and the physiology related to shorter day length. But how to overcome that is not clear, and why choline may help is not entirely clear to me. It's one area of a dairy cow's biology that we're still like in the Middle Ages on, I think.
Yeah. And I've often wondered like about the daylight thing or a vitamin D thing or something
Yeah,
like that that has an effect on it. Or is that cow just inherently like, I'm not supposed to be having a calf this time of
right.
year?
Yeah.
Like, I'm
Like
not
in
gonna,
sheep, right? Sheep have
yeah,
huge responses to that. Yeah.
yeah, like it's not inherent in their DNA that they should be raising a baby through the winter,
Right.
right? So because
Exactly.
it could affect what happens, like their survivability as well, right?
Yep.
So there's
Yep.
so many questions around that. I get thinking about it and then I have to stop thinking about it because my mind's just going in circles and circles and circles.
This is
So
also an anecdote, but I was trying to help a farm that was having just huge headaches with colostrum, just so frustrated. And more for just human frustration with how dark their maternity barn was. They finally put new LED lights in and like doubled the light intensity, and their colostrum problems just went away, it seemed like. They probably still see a fall dip, but
yeah,
again, that's totally anecdote, but there is some old research that, says at least if your lighting is poor, that's probably one factor that could help.
like how does that work though? Because like I was always under the understanding that if you want 16 hours of light for a cow a day, you want and 8 hours of darkness, you want it reversed for a dry cow,
Oh
right? Like you
yeah,
want
that's
more dark than light. So
right. I think, yeah, the literature does say that, but I think that light intensity, even if it's 8 hours, is maybe important, I guess.
okay. Yeah, it's not the amount like it's the how intense it is. So with the choline stuff, like is it like a liver health thing, you think? Or like do you know what kind of metabolic pathways it's opening up to help with that? Like is it energy utilization? Is it
It could be. That was partly why we did that experiment with the challenge to say maybe there's more to it than just straight up liver health. But our experiment didn't point to what we were thinking might be part of it. The person who's probably thought about this the most is Jose Santos at Florida.
Mhm.
He's written some nice stuff on it. And when I'm at meetings and people ask this now, he just says it's an essential nutrient. Like all the organs do better with it. So trying to just point at one and say that's the cause, he's like, is too simplistic. And I guess I kind of agree with him. I think there's very clear evidence any cow that's mildly challenged in terms of liver function, it should help. I think there's great evidence for that. But a lot of like the cows in our experiment were super healthy, and I wouldn't say you couldn't maybe further improve liver function, but it's hard for me to look at the data and see 80% more colostrum, and then day 2 of lactation, they were making, 50% more milk. I don't think that's all liver, probably. I think there
Mhm.
has to be some mammary effects, or at least trafficking of nutrients to the mammary gland.
Well, it's kind of interesting too because it's like you could try other B vitamins on dairies and you get a response. Sometimes you don't, but maybe it's just a matter of we're pushing these cows so hard, like they're on that teetering point, and sometimes the choline will help, push them through, and other times it might not. They maybe are producing enough choline themselves that you don't see a dose
Yeah.
response.
Yeah, again, coming back to like something that drew me into working with dairy cattle is they're so sensitive, right? Because the demands are so high. I think we can
Hmm.
see responses where, 20 years ago, the typical cow wouldn't have shown a response.
Yeah. So, back to the inflammation thing, like, and especially around calving, like we know there's inflammation, and is all inflammation good or is all inflammation bad? Like, what's your thought process on that?
Yeah, I usually try to make a point on that topic that I don't think either thinking is right, somewhere in the middle. We've got some evidence that probably for helping to heal and clean up the uterus that, we have to have at least local inflammation, which is probably almost impossible to keep contained just in the reproductive tract, right? So I think that's part of the story, and it's definitely needed for normal calving and delivery of the placenta. Further, I think we need to get some stuff published, but I think there's some hints that maybe even rewiring the liver and other metabolic organs to deal with lactation, that inflammation may actually help prompt those shifts in physiology. So I think all that's probably good. So the way I think about it is for maybe 2 or 3 days after calving, if we see some jump in markers of inflammation in a cow, as long as it's not fivefold more than normal, and as long as it's sort of getting resolved by 5 to 7 days post calving, I think that's probably pretty good. In the studies where we've given anti-inflammatories and improved milk yield, we actually haven't gotten rid of those peaks right at the beginning, right? We don't really know physiologically why they helped milk yield, except we have seen over weeks lower somatic cells. Maybe we're turning down inflammation in the mammary gland. Maybe that's super helpful, but maybe you don't want to in the whole body for completely get rid of it.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you about that. Like, is there a correlation between, say, something like ketosis and increased somatic cell, like
Yes,
early on, especially?
yes. I think it's a complicated relationship. We did a study maybe 5 or 6 years ago now, where we actually took late lactation cows and infused half of them with ketone bodies, IV infusion continuously to to clamp blood ketones at like a mild hyperketonemia level, and then compared to the controls, and then all the cows got challenged with staph uberis or strep uberis, sorry. Um, and the cows that were getting infused with ketone bodies did way worse at clearing the pathogen. They had the CFUs of that pathogen in milk went sky high compared to the control. So that was super interesting. We think there's good evidence that ketones kind of tamp down on the immune response. Okay, so if you have a cow with inflammation who's not infected, that's maybe good. Maybe it helps
Yeah,
control inflammation, but if she happens to get infected, that could stop her from responding appropriately,
it's
right?
going to put the gas pedal down on it.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Because it's one of those things that I think that the industry's changed a lot is like just body condition and dry cows. And one thing that I'm noticing it now, and maybe you could speak to this too, is that the dry cows that are over conditioned have a lot more problems than the dry cows that are good body condition or maybe even a little bit under body conditioned.
Yeah, I think so. And I think I didn't actually realize this till about a month ago, but that we still call it fat cow syndrome, or I do still. And
Hmm.
that term, I think, originated from a guy in vet med here at Michigan State in the 70s. And I think the way people feed cows in Michigan, we tended to have a lot more of those problems than some parts of the country. Yeah, we still see it. It's gotten a lot better here. And maybe other parts of the country, it's gotten worse because of changes in feedstuffs and strategies for feeding. But yeah, I mean, we just published a new data set that continues to point to the overly fat cows are the biggest problems.
Wow, and I wonder if like they're more prone to getting something like ketosis and they just stop eating. Like where a cow that isn't maybe mobilizing a lot of body fat, they still get that drive to go eat, but the cow that's mobilizing a lot of body fat is saying, "Oh, I'm kind of satiated," when
Yeah,
it's might be giving them that false sense of sense of that, right? So,
yeah, I agree with you. I think that's part of the story.
what can producers do, I guess, on farm to help kind of mitigate some of the inflammation issues?
That's $1 million question. I don't have like, well, I'll tell this anecdote. In the middle of doing a study where we're aiming for sampling fresh cows on 40 farms, and we've already got like 1,200 cows sampled. We're aiming for 1,500. And, of course, we're reaching out, like, let us know if you want to be involved. And a lot of my nutrition consultant friends will be like, hey, Barry, there's these two farms I really want to get enrolled because I've been trying to get them to improve their dry cow facilities and their fresh cow facilities, and they refuse. And I want to show them that their inflammation is through the roof. And invariably, we sample those cows, and they're like a very low herd compared to. So it's like it's easy to say, oh, you don't regroup, and you have good facilities, and it's not that black and white. So I think there's a lot we don't know, to be humble, first of all. But if you know you have an issue on a farm, it's still evolving, but there are some like feed through plant polyphenol type products now that have shown some pretty good promise. There's a lot more in Europe on the market, and there's some good data. We published a study 6 years ago with plant extract from Chinese skullcap that showed some surprising magnitude of effects when fed for 60 days at the start of lactation. So there's some things like that. And it's funny, like in Germany, they can use like meloxicam, ketoprofen, aspirin. They can use any of these anti-inflammatory drugs that they want. And here, there's none of them that we can use
Oh,
on fresh cows. And I know you guys have meloxicam, but it's really
yeah.
only approved for if they have mastitis as a adjunct therapy, right? But yeah.
Yep. No, I think there's enough producers using it as an anti-inflammatory around calving, and I think was it you guys that did the work on like the lactation curve
Yep.
through like the
Yep.
verification studies on it,
Yep.
and I think a lot of people, producers here at least, are using a lot more meloxicam rather than, something like an antibiotic to treat things, or they're using it in conjunction with an antibiotic to kind of help pull them through, like just to make them feel a little bit better and get them back eating is essentially is what I think is the major benefit of it. Because if they have I know I'm getting old enough, like I got young kids, I get up off the floor. I could feel the inflammation.
Doesn't feel
So
like it used to feel.
no,
I
no,
got you.
no. But like I would, I wouldn't want to put a number on like percentage or whatever producers using it. All I know is that a lot more producers are using it, especially, and it's part of their protocols. Like a cow calves in, they're going to pop a bolus or two in and give them a dose of loxicam and drive on. So.
Yeah. There's new papers coming out every few months, and some of them, a fair number lately that are interesting, are adding that onto like lameness treatment. Like if you
Okay.
trim a
That make
cow,
that makes a lot
uh,
of sense.
yeah, it does, right? Yeah, like you said, just
Yeah.
getting the feed bunking back, and if that stimulates another meal, great. And like the last paper I just saw showed better reproductive performance in the, I think, 2 months after getting meloxicam if it was a lame cow.
Really. So
Yeah,
yeah, just making sure that they can be more normal cows, I guess, at the
yeah,
end of the
maybe
day.
so. Yep.
Yeah, and it's super interesting on how that's changed. Like 5 years ago, you never heard of nobody even thought about giving a cow mox or an animal meloxicam, and now it's, you know, producers are doing it when they're dehorning, they're doing it at
Yeah.
calving, they're doing it all over the place, and they're just, I guess, looking at ways of getting away from antibiotics, and I think that's one of the things that's kind of helping a little bit. So,
Yep.
and we're coming into summer. I know it's not that nice out today. Well, it's kind of sunny here, I guess, but we're 6, 7 degrees. But I know last week or 2 weeks ago now, we started to get up in the 18, 20 degrees C, and some people's fans kicked on, and they're like, "Oh, that one doesn't have a belt. That one doesn't have that." So I was just wondering some of your thoughts on some heat stress issues as we're getting into that season.
Yeah. We were talking before we hit record here, like we're kind of in the home stretch of putting up a new research dairy here at Michigan State. And one of the big, lengthy ad nauseum debates we had in the planning process is, do we put in naturally ventilated barn? Because that's still 80% of the barns in Michigan, or do we do a cross vent or do a tunnel vent? And we ended up putting up a tunnel vent facility, and the upfront cost for the fans and everything is high. And then the operating cost is high. But so it's, I think, still an open question in our climate. Does that pay off over a 20-year span or not? But boy, we've had 3 or 4 high-profile farms here in Michigan in the last even just 2 or 3 years convert some existing barns to tunnel vents from natural vent, or put up a new tunnel vent. And the magnitude of difference in productivity between cows and side-by-side barns with the tunnel ventilation has been surprising even to me. So I think there's a case to be made that even though we're kind of lucky in terms of the heat stress magnitude not being terrible here, that these cows are still impacted by it. And one thing I talk about, I worked in Kansas for a long time, and it's a bigger issue there. But often the cows would get hit the worst with the first week of even mild warm temperatures. Like you said, the warm up in early March when cows have a winter coat on and they're not adapted at all, sometimes can be as tough as like a very warm week in August when they've had 2 months to adapt, right? So to your point about maintenance, that's often what catches people off guard, is they haven't gone through and looked at the fans because they've been busy dealing with winter. And you could really head off some of that early season stress, but the equipment's not ready, right? So it's a good sort of that next level up of management, right, to be ahead of those things and cut off that negative impact.
Yeah, so with the barn that you guys are building, like you said, you went with a tunnel. Like, is it like the newer style hybrid tunnel, or is it like the more traditional kind of low roof? You're just pulling air through the barn off the end wall, or do you have like fans above cows as well?
We have fans above calves as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I would call it's not really a low roof. It's as low as you can reasonably get it with having sufficient pitch to get rid of snow. And,
Yeah.
so it's not like the cross vents, right? And that's been the downfall of cross vents, is people either use baffles and they cause a lot of headaches. Or I think what people are doing now, if they do a cross vent, is just to put a bunch of fans right over the cows too, and quit trying to get the cross wind to get pushed down by baffles and such.
Well, and that was always like going into some of the early tunnels and even some of the earlier cross fences, like there was just not enough wind velocity at the beginning of the
Yeah.
barn. It was almost like it was getting choked out. Like there wasn't enough static pressure, I guess, to get the airspeed up high enough. And so I would say probably here in Ontario, of the new barns that go up, I would say probably somewhere around 60% to two-thirds are now mechanically ventilated, like new installations.
Okay. Yep.
And whether it be cross vent, a lot more of these like hybrid kind of tunnel vent barns are going up. Some of them are very wide. Some of them are only, 4-row barns still, but some of them are like 8 to 12 rows wide. And they're pretty nice. And the biggest thing we see, and like you kind of mentioned before, is like we're holding better peaks and we're holding better components through the summer. And one thing last summer, like we had a pretty warm summer last year, like one of the warmer ones that I can remember. And anybody that had a mechanically ventilated barn held on to components and milk a little bit better. And then to add to that, anybody that was adding water at the feed rail as well, their components didn't even seem like they skipped a beat through the summer. They dropped a little bit, but not, maybe zero point zero 0.05 or zero point 0.1 compared to what they were doing in the spring, right? So,
Yeah, and I think the hard thing that to quantify in a clean way is, what are the benefits of, let's say, a cow calves in June and you hit a better peak in August because she's cooled. Certainly she's going to give more milk for the next 8 months after that, right? But that's hard to quantify, and that math matters to the ROI on that investment.
well, I mean, like if you can hold a 2 or 3 kilo higher peak, like that's sustained through the lactation. Like if you don't
Yeah.
hit that number, like to me, it's lost. it's
Right.
lost revenue. And like you said, that's very, very hard to quantify. And it's interesting. I was at one of my clients the other day and they have a cross vent and we were having a meeting with their veterinarian there and he said, well, what's the hydro difference like from the old style barn to the new style barn? And anyway, so I think we looked at March's hydro bill versus last year's July hydro bill, and it was essentially double.
Okay. Yep. It's
So
not trivial. I mean, the
no,
new fans, if they cost more, but they help on the energy draw. But yeah, it's not a trivial amount. But then you compare that to the milk revenue and say, what additional milk revenue do you need? And usually it's like a 1 or 2% for the year, right? Is enough to
yeah.
pay.
What are your thoughts on putting water on cows in some of these barns too? Because that's the next challenge, especially with the cross vents. Like it's really tough to get water down onto the cows in them, and I think a lot of people are kind of getting away from putting sprinklers in these barns because it's just blowing into the stalls, which creates a whole other plethora of problems.
That is one of the reasons we decided on a tunnel versus a cross vent. One of several reasons. Yeah, that is a big challenge. I guess I'm used to still seeing, again, I said probably 80 or 90% of farms here still have natural ventilation. And so the vast majority of those would be doing feedline soakers. And I think despite the problems you mentioned, like if you're in a Texas environment, something much hotter climate, I think those benefits are there. I think it is an open question in our climate, whether that's necessary or beneficial if you're mechanically ventilated. And actually, that's one thing I'm excited about in our new facility. We have replicated pens, so we can apply pen level treatments like
Yeah.
turning on or off the feedline soakers. And of course, we have to think about like we may have to put the soakers downwind to have a
Hmm.
fair comparison, but I think that's something I'd like to do is a very simple question, but like say for the length of the summer, we keep cows in those pens and either turn them on or off and see what it does.
And what about like dry cows? Like how important is it to make sure that you've got adequate fan and even getting water and things on them? When I started my career almost 20 years ago, nobody cared about dry cows.
Right,
Like
exactly.
it was a far off dry cow. We throw her in the back old barn. We'll deal with her when she calves
Yeah.
again. And now it's pretty standard across the industry that, that's probably the dry cow pen is probably your most important pen on the farm.
Yeah, and I give a lot of credit to the team out of Florida. Like they did some nice studies and did a good job of sharing that message. And it was amazing from the time they did their first study to today, which is probably only 15 years, the fraction of farms cooling dry cows went from 10% to 80 probably or 90, right?
Yeah.
It's not just because of them, but it's a lot of it. And granted, their experiments are kind of extreme because it's Florida humidity and heat, but still, they're showing not only effects on milk production in the next lactation, but health in the next lactation, fertility, and then the calf effects, right? So now they've
Yeah.
shown that those heifers born from those cows that weren't cooled are less productive and more likely to get cold and stuff. So yeah, that knock-on long-term effect, especially when it's only, what, 15% of the capacity of your farm. That's a 15% add-on in terms of infrastructure, right? It's probably easily worth it. But again, you have that whole caveat of, okay, how far north is it pay off? It's hard to answer, I guess, but
Last time I was in Alberta, they have fans. They're starting to put tunnel barns up and stuff in Alberta, and so at least that far north. So,
okay, right.
well, and it's funny. Like I thought I'd learn a lot about heat stress by going to California, and some of the dairies we toured there didn't even have fans in them. Like they're just steel
Oh,
sheds, like just to get them
oh
out of the
yeah.
shade. And then we went to Florida, and we were at one of the farms down there, and they had no gable wall, and they had uh, fans over the cows. They had fans in the end of the wall, like you're standing at the where the gable wall is supposed to be, and your coat is like just like sucked right to your back. And every farmer down there was like, "Yeah, we run a 28-30% preg rate, except for in the summer." So like, the heat really gets to them down there. So,
Yeah, that's a tough environment. Yeah.
is there anything else like around heat stress that you can kind of shed some information for our producers on some of the things that they can do on the farm going into this year's summer that can help them out?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the other thing that I've been surprised by now and then is I've seen different people take over farms here and there and like just do something super simple, like put in an extra water source in the pathway back from the parlor to pens. And I've, seen examples where people, who knows for sure if that's the cause, but they've seen a couple pounds of milk, in those situations, and they kind of attribute it to that. So just making sure, you think about it a lot when you're building a facility, and then you tend to not to again. And I think sometimes we overlook simple things like that.
Yeah, I know water's a relatively cheap resource in our area of North America. So, it's a lot of barn planning. Like you go through this exercise with producers and it's like, are your water lines big enough? Do you have enough capacity so that that water trough fills up fast enough? Like, is it a shallow one or is it a deep one? Like, how easily can you clean this thing? Like, there's a lot of those questions around that. And like, water is so critically important in the summer. And I've had this talk with producers too. It's like in the summer, if you put sprinklers in, a cow's going to get that water on her back. It's still going to end up in the manure pit. If you have that as no sprinklers and don't have enough water space, like those cows are really going to be hit, I think, a lot harder by heat stress if they can't get adequate amounts of water in there. And if you look back, like everybody says, oh, they drink 150 liters of water in the day during heat stress. Well, that was an early 90s cow.
Yeah, right.
What's going on, 30 years, 35 years later, like with the amount of components, like we talked about earlier, that these things are drinking, like how much more water do we need now compared to what we did 30 years ago, right?
Right. Yep. It's kind of bizarre to think about it, but it's a cooling mechanism, right, for cows. It's just if you drink cold water and pee out hot water,
Yeah, something's got to
energy,
give. Like
right?
it goes back to the energy's not created nor destroyed, right? So,
Exactly. Yep.
and like with your barn at Michigan State, are you guys doing robotic or are you guys doing parlor or
Both. So,
both? Yeah.
there's things we're doing that a commercial farm would be crazy to do for research and teaching, right? So we're going to have two robots, mostly for teaching. We'll probably do some research too. And then so that most of our studies are done with fixed milking intervals, most of our cows are going to go through just a double 12 parallel parlor.
Yeah. And is it at the same site that the tie stall's at?
Just right next to it so that we could keep operating now. But yeah, we still have a digester there. So we wanted to build right next so we could keep using that facility.
Yeah. That's excellent. Well, I want to thank you for your time today, Barry. It was really great to hear some of your insights on and some of the stuff you guys are doing at Michigan State with inflammation and it looks like you guys are really investing in the future for the dairy industry there in Michigan. And I hope to someday come visit the new facility when you guys are up and running. So
Yeah, thanks. Love to have you.
yeah, it'd be good to see where you came from and where you guys are headed. So
yeah, absolutely. Thanks. I enjoyed the conversation.
thanks for listening. This episode of the Dairy Farmers Digest is brought to you by the dairy team at Longstanding Feed and Supply Limited. If you enjoyed the show, subscribe and follow us on your favorite podcast player, and please leave us a review. If you would like further information about today's topic, check out the show notes for further details and our contact information. I would also like to extend a special thanks to Christine Schoonerwood, our producer, and our sound engineer, Daniel Noguera.